The dawn of humanity, Homo habilis. 2.5 million years ago, in the heart of East Africa, where endless grasslands found peace under a turquoise sky, a different dawn began. In an era when the world was cast under the shadow of colossal glaciers, beings emerged who would forever change the fate of the Earth unknowingly. They were the first sparks of wisdom in the darkness, the initial steps towards consciousness. They marked the beginning of a path that leads to us, a tumultuous journey from cave to galaxy. For millions of years, these astonishing beings lived in small, unified groups across the vast savannas of East and South Africa. They were our distant ancestors, a bridge between the world of apes and humans. But life in that era was a story of survival and struggle. The ancient African plains were a land filled with the shadows of danger. Life was often short and brutal. Nevertheless, Homo habilis persevered, and over time a spark of genius ignited in their genes. This was the beginning of an evolutionary journey that reached you and me. Imagine if we were to pull a Homo habilis from 2.5 million years of history and have them walk our bustling city streets in a suit. All eyes would be fixated on them. They were the first prototype of a human, a primitive yet vital precursor. They were the seed from which the great tree of humanity would sprout, leading one day to Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. An adult male Homo habilis was about 1.5 meters tall, covered in dense hair inherited from their ancestors. Their long, powerful arms were still well suited for climbing trees and escaping the clutches of death. It was as if the allure of the vast plains had drawn them away from the safety of the branches. But danger lurked around every corner. A swift escape to the green refuge of the trees was often the only way to salvation. Yet Homo habilis often stood upright on 2 feet. They had gained the ability to run longer distances than their ancestors. Their feet were the solid pillars of their will to survive, remarkably longer than any aquatic species before them. Their small groups traveled for kilometers across the immense savannas of Africa in search of food and new territories. They were the narrators of the first pages of human migration history. Over time, it was the face of Homo habilis that made them distinct. They still bore the traces of their ape-like past, but within them, the sparks of humanity were visible. Their skull volume was less than half that of modern humans. They had a narrower forehead, higher set eyes, and a smaller, rounder skull at the back. Their wide nose and large, forward-facing nostrils recalled their connection to the animal kingdom. Their prominent mouth was evidence of their ape-like lineage. Habilis evolved from a lineage of upright hominids called Australopithecus. Australopithecus, with its similar facial features, stepped onto the earth. It was probably covered in more hair, its mouth was more prominent, and its skull was smaller and fully adapted to living among branches. But it was the first to stand on 2 feet for long periods, gradually moving away from trees and becoming more connected to life on the ground. Before the astonishing discovery of Homo habilis in 1964 by a legendary team led by Louis Leakey, Homo erectus, a later and more advanced species, was thought to be the missing link in evolution. However, since Homo erectus showed more fundamental changes compared to Australopithecus, it seemed like a sudden leap. The discovery of Homo habilis revealed the missing piece of the complex puzzle of human evolution. But what force, what evolutionary pressure transformed one of the Australopithecus species into Homo habilis? This is a question that has preoccupied scientists' minds since its discovery. Perhaps the secret lies in food sources or environmental changes these hominids experienced. Perhaps the forests that Australopithecus and their ancestors depended on began to disappear, forcing them to leave the branches and adapt more to walking on the ground. Although Homo habilis was officially introduced as a new species in 1964, The first signs of its existence emerged with the discovery of two fossilized teeth by the British explorer couple Mary and Louis Leakey in Oldowan Gorge, a sacred paleoanthropological site in Tanzania. These teeth belonged to an adult hominid and surprisingly resembled modern human teeth. Over time, Oldowan Gorge became a unique treasure trove for discovering fossils of this mysterious species. An incomplete skeleton of a young male Homo habilis was also found at the same site, and since then, every excavation has told a new story from the distant past. Today, thanks to the discovery of numerous fossils, we have a relatively complete understanding of Homo habilis's anatomy. Homo habilis was one of the first users of primitive stone tools in the genus Homo. Although Australopithecus also used very simple tools to break food, Homo habilis took this skill to a whole new level, laying the foundation for humanity's future machines and technologies. Evidence of shaping and breaking stones at Oldowan Gorge shows that those who made them Homo habilis knew how to use these tools. They were more shaped and advanced than the primitive stone tools made by Australopithecus, and the existence of these tools indicates that these beings had the ability to distinguish appropriate points for striking stones and creating a sharp edge. This required a high level of intelligence, and at the time they emerged, Homo habilis were the most intelligent beings to have evolved. A dawn had begun, not only for the animal kingdom, but for the entire world. However, we must remember that tool design was very primitive. There is no evidence that Homo habilis could make more complex tools than a simple proto-biface, a very primitive axe shape that would one day evolve into deadly spears and sharp knives. This suggests that Homo habilis was probably not a master hunter. Their body structure and teeth indicate that they supplemented their plant-based diet with some meat. However, it was difficult for them to access large amounts of meat without the help of other predators. Of course, it's possible they hunted careless small animals or bird eggs with their strong hands, but they lacked the ability to hunt larger prey like deer and other herbivores. Therefore, it's reasonable to assume that most of the meat in Homo habilis's diet came from carcasses previously hunted by other carnivores. They were an opportunistic scavenger, much like the vultures that shared the Pleistocene plains with them. Regarding Homo habilis's social structure, it's estimated that they lived in groups of up to 80 individuals. This social structure is sometimes compared to baboon groups, where several males live with several females. The males would cooperate to protect the group against rivals or aggressors. This likely involved raising their arms, throwing stones and sticks, and making frequent noises to scare off predators or rivals. If this method didn't work, Homo habilis would quickly seek refuge in trees, using their still long arms. The open savannas were a new and dangerous habitat for these hominids, and danger could lurk behind every tree, rock, or bush. There are also speculations that Homo habilis may have been the first human species to experience monogamy. Subsequent species after Homo habilis, Homo ergaster and Homo erectus, are known to have had a single mate at a certain time. The African savannas of the early Pleistocene were not much different in landscape from today's Tanzanian grasslands. Long grasses in cool green hues spread across this vast landscape, interrupted only by scattered trees or rock formations. More dense forests were found at the edges of these wide plains. Rivers still flowed through these lands, providing a vital water source for these early humans. As time passed, Homo became less dependent on tree life. Their brains were growing. They learned to walk and run constantly on 2 feet and adapted to the abundant food sources in Africa's great savannas. Nature was pushing them towards the plains, but Homo habilis was not alone in these plains. At least 4 different hominid species, 3 of which belonged to the genus Homo, lived in the Tanzanian savannas at the same time as Homo habilis. This was not the first time multiple hominid species coexisted in the same time and place. Homo ergaster, Homo erectus, and Homo rudolfensis were present during the Habilis period, especially ergaster and erectus. These were species that emerged in these plains after Habilis and were, in fact, closer to us than their primitive cousins. Although Homo habilis was taking the first steps towards conquering the grasslands, they were certainly not at the top of their ecosystem. Individuals who strayed from the group, the young, the old, or the injured, had to be very careful doing almost anything in Pleistocene Tanzania, because there were numerous threats awaiting a careless, primitive hominid. The savannas were teeming with large carnivorous felines. For example, leopards, similar to those living today, could climb trees and ambush an unwary hominid, and also silently stalk them on the ground. Two extinct large cat genera were also found in these plains, Dinophilis and Meganterion, a deadly pair of saber-toothed cats. Homo habilis didn't just have to avoid cats. Africa at that time was home to another extinct mammalian predator that roamed the plains in groups. For the predatory hyenas, our relatives were easy prey. It's difficult to provide definitive and reliable reasons for the ultimate extinction of Homo habilis. Many factors played a role in the demise of this primitive species. However, a theory published in the journal PLOS One in 2020 by Dr. Pasquale Raya from the University of Naples Federico II in Italy may offer a much more valid answer. Pasquale Raya and his colleagues, by simulating past climates with an advanced model, were able to track rainfall, temperature, and general climate during the Pliocene and Pleistocene epochs. According to their findings, later Homo species began to lose access to their climatic niches due to severe and rapid global climate changes. The environments these early humans depended on began to disappear, and as a result, food sources were depleted. Perhaps the same fate applied to Homo habilis, or perhaps this was just one of many factors in their downfall. For you and me, they truly deserve their translated name, the handyman. The beginning of our ancestors' journey may be far removed from the complexities and comforts of today. But Homo habilis and their evolutionary ascent were the most intelligent beings the planet had seen up to that point in history. If you found this journey into humanity's past insightful, hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into science.